Thank you for tuning in to the virtual candidate debates hosted by Teaching for the Culture. My name is Bianca Goolsby, and I'm so excited to be with you this evening. We have an action-packed list of events in October covering Hillsborough to Manatee County. Thank you for being intentional in this work because our children deserve the best, and they deserve the best people in the seats that control the future and future generations to come. Due to the pandemic, we wanted to change up the format to allow you to ask the questions to the candidates as if we were having an in-person event. This event is live and is streaming on Facebook and YouTube. The link will be provided in the comments for you to have the access to click and join us. You will then be afforded the opportunity to ask a candidate a question. Please keep your questions brief and please have the right energy and intentionality when asking the candidates questions. Thank you again for tuning in to the virtual debates. And if you're here for the replay, thank you for joining and watching what was said. I always say the three keys are accountability, transparency, and integrity. And it's up to you. Your children are counting on you on picking the best people for our school board seats. Well, good evening. How you doing, Jessica Vaughn?
I'm doing fantastic. I love that intro. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm so excited that you are here today. Just want to give a disclaimer. Thank you for tuning in. If you are watching the 6 p.m. Event with Nadia Combs, it is on Teaching for the Culture on platforms such as Facebook and YouTube so that you can go back and reference. But today we are talking about right now District 3, and we're talking with Jessica Vaughn. I want to just say in full transparency that I did invite her opponent, Mitch Thrower. Mitch Thrower did decide to decline moments after Steve Kona decided to decline the event. I'm not sure what exactly transpired with that. However, I did give them an opportunity to hop on today to have this conversation with you, the public. So there is a link in the comments where you are more than welcome to click on so that you can ask questions. So before we get started, and I see people already queuing up, so please hold your seats and hold your spots. I'm going to get to you in a second, but I want to give Jessica Vaughn an opportunity to just say a brief introduction to talk about her platform, and then we're going to get rolling to the questions.
Well, thank you so much. I watched the broadcast before this with Nadia a little bit, and I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to have so many of the same answers. But I know that one of the questions you had asked was what prompted you to want to run for school board? And for me, it's a complex series of personal experiences. First of all, I've been watching kind of the destruction of public education happening, and I'm deeply concerned about that. And I think we need more people who really can help, educate the public about what that means and what that looks like. So that was one of the reasons that prompted me to run for school board. Secondly, my own personal experience with having my son, who's a neurodiverse learner, an exceptional student, and his role in public schools and his experience with Montessori, and how that led me to understand that there are some definite issues with socioeconomic access when it comes to our public education. Third of all, as being involved in the community and a community organizer, I realized that there were a lot of people who were running for the school board who were just really doing it because they wanted a stepping stone for their political career and they weren't passionate about education. And I saw that every day in the policies that were enacted. And then also just being in the schools and seeing, the complete differences in the schools and how they're supported and they're funded and the inequities that we have all led me towards kind of putting my money where my mouth is, because it's really easy to sit back and, criticize candidates, but to put your money where your mouth is and run for a school board. So thank you so much. Sorry, my dogs might bark in the background.
Listen, mine too. So we're home, pandemic time, so I appreciate it. So we have questions already, and Melanie, let's go ahead and add Melanie to the stream. Hey Melanie, how are you?
Sunshine.
I'm great, thank you.
Good. So what's your question?
Jessica, I really appreciate you running. I know how challenging it's been to just compete and participate in a campaign. So I was just wondering, at this point from now till election day, where are you planning to focus your energy?
That's a really good question. It is very much a challenge. I'm so thankful for forums like these, but there are a lot of forums that are coming up as well. So we're really trying to shift as much as we want to do forums and really connect with people, on these platforms to getting out the vote and connecting with our voters. So we have sign wavings coming up this weekend. We have a phone bank that's open. We've been working with the different organizations to do lit drops to make sure candidates know voters know our information. We are doing a mailer that's going out. We are really putting up signs because for some reason our signs are coming down as quickly as we can put them up, and it's not code enforcement taking them. So really working to get out our message. I've been, doing news stories and working with different organizations to really understand, more about educational policy and how I can be an advocate for each individual organization and their needs. But really, we're just trying to get out the vote. So really relying on our volunteers to reach our voters.
Thank you, Melanie, for your question. All right. So next we have Kristen. How are you? You're on mute.
There I am. Thanks. No, I like this forum. I've been full disclosure. I'm a full supporter of Jessica's, and the last forum she only had like a 1-minute time limit. So I thought that I would love to hear more about her actual ideas for creating more equity and equality in the school system and ending the school to prison pipeline, because there's so much to be explored in that, and so much more we can do. So a little more time is probably needed than a minute.
I know that's so hard, is that some of these concepts are so complex. Trying to actually educate and talk about them in a short amount of time feels like we're doing injustice for it. So thank you. In regards to the school to prison pipeline, what we really have to look at is we have to look at, number one, discipline policies, right? Because when you look at it, Black and brown students are suspended disproportionately to white students. There's a different narrative in general when we talk about the discipline methods that we have when it comes to our students of color, and even just cultural things. I've heard students talk about how, the way that they express themselves is viewed differently. So I think, one, making sure that we have bias training, and everybody who's involved in the school level, whether it's our support staff, our teachers, our school board members, people in administration, really have to have bias training to understand and unpack our own cultural biases that we bring in when we have these conversations. So that's important first and foremost. Secondly, when we're talking about discipline, especially in communities that have been systemically attacked and destroyed, we have to talk about restorative discipline and what that looks like, as opposed to constantly suspending students or giving them punitive responses to their behavior. We have to look at ways to empower them, to support them, to talk about conflict resolution, to give them alternatives. That's got to be the number two. There's also, we have to talk about kids who aren't college bound and how we can support those students, right? Because right now there's like one narrative. You go to school, you graduate, you go to college, or, otherwise you're on your own. And there are so many partnerships that we can make specifically with the unions, with state certified training options that we can talk about when we're talking about middle school and high school, where they offer free training to get a trade where you work on the job at the same time. So you're not just expected to not have a living while not make a living while you're going through this. You get paid more than the average. You have a group of people who are your brothers who stand behind you and protect you. You get amazing health benefits that go for your entire family. And then you get a pension. There are all these programs that we can talk about that would help for students who aren't necessarily college bound. And we have to make those programs available and talk about them and accessible. And then we want to look at community schools as well. When we're talking about wraparound services, when we go back to when we're talking about restorative discipline, not just talking about the discipline, but support altogether, mental health support, reinvesting in the communities that these schools are in, and building a partnership between the schools and the community so that the community can go there for safe houses, resources, for events to build up, and the school can also rely on that community to invest in it. So it's got to be a holistic conversation, because it's not just the schools, it's communities in general that I mentioned have been systemically destroyed. When you look at communities where a good portion of the men are locked up and locked away in general and taken away from the communities, that has all sorts of residual effects that we need to talk about. So it has to be, at a much deeper level. And we have to partner with people, who are doing the work on that and at the forefront of that and have those conversations. So those are my ideas when we're talking about specifically the school to prison pipeline and equity. I also think another thing we need to do when we talk about equity is have a holistic conversation about what that means, because racial justice is a crucial part of equity, absolutely, and should be at the forefront, especially now with what's happening in our country and with our president who refuses to condemn white supremacy, and seeing people who are just murdered in the street with no accountability. But equity also talks about socioeconomic equity. We have to be talking about exceptional learners or exceptional students that are neurodiverse, that aren't typical learners. We need to be talking about students who don't have, English as their first language, who, are ESOL, or students who just have physical disabilities. So equity, or the LGBTA population. So it has to be a broad conversation about making sure we're supporting all of our students and meeting their individual needs, and having a conversation about how best to support that going forward. I feel like I'm talking a lot.
This is your opportunity. Did you answer your question?
What was that?
That was great. I appreciated it. Yeah, absolutely.
I see another question here, but I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer that or if Bianca's going to ask that question.
So it's interesting. So Melanie is backstage, who had asked the question originally. So I'm going to put you backstage, Kristen. Thank you so much for asking your question.
Thank
you.
I
actually want Melanie to go ahead and ask that question.
Oh, hey, you were just giving such a great explanation of equity, and I know we've heard in a lot of forums from concerned Black parents about rhetoric that's anti-charter school, because they're concerned that they will never see the investment in their neighborhood and public schools. Absolutely. So I was wondering how, in your vision, charter schools fit with equity.
Thank you. So I think that's a really important question, and it's a really challenging conversation to have about charter schools, especially when we talk about marginalized communities that have been so failed by our school systems for so long. In general, when we try to educate people about what charter schools were originally created for, what their original intent were to be alternative places where we could try out alternative education. And as I've mentioned, my son is neurodiverse. We're privileged enough to live in a really good neighborhood, so I could send my school to, our neighborhood school and make sure that he'd have the support that he needed. But because our curriculum has been engineered for standardized testing, it doesn't support students who aren't neurotypical. So I was fortunate enough to be able to extend his school at Montessori for a couple extra years before transitioning him to public school. And that was because I had the privilege to be able to pay for that. But charter schools, if we had public Montessori schools, if we had public Waldorf schools, if we allowed charter schools to try out that alternative education that is really good for neurodiverse learners, for students who are recovering from trauma, from underserved populations, to take those best practices from those charter schools that are really helping our students, and then partner with our public schools to bring those in and make our public schools as best as we possibly can. That's what charter schools were originally created for. However, people had realized that they're also a great way to privatize education and profit from our education system. Is that first, we break down education even more, we add more standards, we do more testing, we underfund public education already. We definitely talk about marginalized communities, and then charter schools go in and they're the answer. They're supposed to be the school choice that goes ahead, and they they're the savior of where public schools have failed. The problem is that these charter schools, one, when you're designed to only work for profit, the fastest way that you make profit is by cutting quality. So when you look at schools of hope that are specific charter schools that are aimed at underserved populations specifically, they passed a law in 2018 through our Florida legislation that says those schools don't have to have college educated teachers or certified teachers for the first few years, right? So they can hire teachers who don't have college educations, who don't have certifications, they can pay them way less, and then they stand to profit. So it comes to, how do we have these larger conversations, and how do we ask people in marginalized communities that have been underserved to just hang on, so we fix public education, right? We've been asking them to hang on forever, and that's not fair, absolutely. So I understand this push for charter schools within those communities, because it's about time somebody's speaking directly to the needs of these students. But there are two problems with that. Number one, these charter schools, again, we're not having the same transparency, the same accountability, the same, standards put on what they're able to offer their students. And they don't have the same non-discriminatory policies that we've worked so hard to make sure that we fought for when it comes to education. So they can discriminate based on juvenile records. They can discriminate based on behavioral problems. They can discriminate based on hair texture. And they have these policies way in the back of their books where they don't have to put them up front when parents are making choices. And in their minds, they want to pick, right, the best and brightest students. And what that does is any students in those communities who don't make it into these charter schools that, may or may not be better for their public schools, those students who don't make it in are going to be stuck in our public school system that's even less funded than it is now. That's even, worse than it is now, because those charter schools are sucking up all of our resources. So it's really going to make the class divide for the parents who can navigate these systems even greater. And what we need to do is we need to figure out, if we're gonna allow charter schools to be a player, we have to make sure, one, that we're advocating that they have the same accountability, that they have the same non-discriminatory policies, that they're filling a need our public schools don't, that they're partnering with our public schools to make sure they're bringing those best practices back, that they're coming back, and that they are not for profit, because technically all charter schools are not for profit, but what they do, the ones that are for profit, is they hire for-profit managerial companies on the back end, and that's how they become for-profit charter schools. So as Bianca likes to say, we have to be very intentional about charter schools expansion. And there are great charter schools. Nadia mentioned them. I love Pepin Academy. I love so many of the charter schools that we have. Learning Gate, it offers outside environment where kids can get out and they can play. And they're allowed to be a little more flexible in their curriculum, but they have to be independently managed. They have to make sure they have the same accountability and standards, and that they're sharing that information with us, because public school is the #1 biggest equalizer within our system. And if we allow that to deteriorate, and we stop fighting to make our public schools better, and we stop fighting to reform public school so that it works for everybody, it's just going to make the class divide and the race divide greater. And if you can tell, I'm passionate about that.
Yeah, no, that was a very thoughtful answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Melanie. That was an awesome question. So there is a question that is in the chat, and I'm just going to summarize it. But basically the question asks if you could share your personal experiences with the Prison to Pipeline.
Oh, goodness. Absolutely. So when I was teaching at Kenley Elementary in first grade, we had a student he had a lot of, some emotional problems. I think he probably had some learning disabilities that hadn't been identified. And, he had an issue where he became a little bit violent. He was a little bit violent with one of the teachers. He was a little bit violent with one of the assistant principals, and he got Baker acted. He was Baker acted for 24 hours. A first grader. His parents weren't there to take care of him. His first experience with school, when he hit some challenges, was exactly for it to be punitive, for him to be locked up. And that sent a message for him and his fellow classmates. And I do not see that same kind of thing happening in our schools, where there are predominantly not students of color, or they're predominantly socioeconomically supported. In those situations, they find a timeout room, or they nurture the student, or they figure out if there's, a disability happening, and they support those students. Whereas in our achievement schools, our schools that need more support, again, where our communities have been devastated by systemic policies for so long, the first response is to immediately lock our students up, kick them out of school, give them punitive response that prepares them for that, prison mentality. And that's just one of many experiences.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the question. And for those of you that are watching, there is the link that is in the comments. So you're more than welcome to click the link and hop on to ask Jessica questions. So in the meantime, I'm going to ask her some questions until more people hop on. And I do appreciate the people participating tonight on a Friday. It is amazing. And I appreciate you so much for being here. So with all of this being stated, I want to shift the conversation to the budget. The budget has been a hot topic for Hillsborough County for months now with payroll issues to making cuts. So I just want to know, what is your statement on what's happening with the budget crisis, and what are some of the things that you're looking to do if you are elected on November 3rd?
So this is not new to Hillsborough County. We've continually had a budget crisis, and we can trace it back to, when we implemented a Bill Gates grant where we try to, build in some accountability, and we built in all these peer mentors, which were a great idea. And then the grant ended in a year, and we had to go back and still fund all of these positions. And I think, unfortunately, again, when we have a disconnect from the people who are on the board who don't necessarily understand education and policy and how we should be prioritizing our money when it comes to spending things, we find ourselves continually having this problem over and over again. So it's nothing new to our county, and it's one of the reasons I was motivated to run. Secondly, we have to be honest and have an honest conversation about the fact that we are not getting enough money from Tallahassee. Again, it's been engineered so that they starve out public education, and we need our school board to be transparent about that, and not just cozy up with Tallahassee, but to really advocate that education has to be a priority, and we have to stop underfunding it. However, I am concerned again about the board, because I think that there is a disconnect from spending money to prioritize the people who are actually engaging with our students every day, and making sure that they're valued and supported, and how that affects education. And I hate to kind of revamp this because I feel like it's been talked about forever, but right before we have a budget crisis, if we're approving multi-million-dollar reading software, which reading software is great in a supplement to a already strong reading program that has reading coaches and teachers who understand phonics and breaking down and chunking down reading. If we were a flush district with a ton of money and we had a strong reading program and we wanted this great software to enhance that, that would be fantastic. But when we're spending multi-million dollars over a reading software that's really going to be utilized just as another level of preparing students for standardized testing, and then we're talking about cutting our actual reading coaches who are there engaging with the students, teaching reading is a really complicated strategy. It involves just using your mouth to help students understand how to make those sounds. It involves reading blends, and there are so many important pieces that you're just not going to get on a computer program. I see the students who sit on iReady and they've learned to game the system and figure out the first few words or the first few letters to get past that level. And then you sit down with them in a guiding reading table and they can't even read sight words. And so that disconnect from what part of education is really impactful, and how best to spend our money to make sure that we're supporting the people who are trained to do this, and prioritizing. I understand that our buildings are falling apart and they wanted to redo the Rosac building, but instead of doing that building and adding new furniture, instead of approving multi-million-dollar software, we should be talking about supporting our students and our teachers and our support staffs who are on the forefront of education and are there every day working for student achievement. And that is my priority, making sure that we are working with our teachers, making sure we're supporting them. I mean, they're not asking for huge, gigantic things. Nadia said this, I said this, none of us got into education because we wanted to make the big bucks, right? They get in there because they're passionate about students, and they've bent over backwards the last few months. I mean, the things that I've seen our teachers do astonish me, whether, you know, they've changed their curriculum, they're going to e-learning, they're simultaneously learning, they're getting their classrooms ready. And then to come in and say, sorry, we've overstaffed you, you cost too much money, you're the first thing we're writing off. It devalues those teachers, and it causes such a ripple in the education that our students are getting, and the quality and the mental health of our teachers, that it's really problematic to me. So prioritizing our staff and our teachers, our support staff, our janitors, our lunchroom ladies, our bus drivers, lunchroom people, our bus drivers is really important, but also transparency in the budget, right? Because that's an issue. I want to make sure that we're engaging the public and that the public has a say-so in how we're spending our money. You know, as far as I understand, there's a policy and the number keeps changing, but if it's under, first I think it was $300,000, they didn't even really discuss it. They just passed expenditures under $300,000. And then I think that changed to $100,000, and then it went up to $500,000. But if there's parts of our budget that aren't even having a full conversation because we've capped certain amounts, then that's a problem. And the public doesn't feel like they're connected to how we're spending our money, and there's not enough transparency. So even I don't feel like I fully understand the budget, and I've gone through all the financials I can. I've had people sit down and explain it to me, but there are so many pieces that aren't transparent. So I think really educating people too, where do we get the money? How do we spend it? Why are we prioritizing that? And giving them a say-so is important. And again, I'm talking too much, aren't I?
No, you're not. I think that you're giving the voters exactly what they needed, due to the fact that, you know, other forums, they have, you know, time certain and you only have 1 minute. You couldn't get all of that out in 1 minute. So it's awesome that you have this opportunity. And so it does work out that your opponent decided not to show up and decline, because it really gives you a voice. So Jennifer made a comment and she said, absolutely, I don't understand why we got that software when we barely have any computers at all at my school.
Yes, that's another thing that, you know, we want to talk about technology and putting forefront on the technology, but if you go into schools, they don't have enough working computers in the classroom. Even in the computer labs, you bring your students in the computer lab, and it takes at least 10 minutes to get every student on a working computer. That's 10 minutes of time where they should be in the computer lab utilizing that software, but instead they're playing a game of, does this computer work? Does this keyboard work? Really, you're spending your time just trying to get the machines working before you can even operate it. And then what are we using it for? Are we really using it to its fullest and most robust capability, or are we using it for standardized testing? Because I can tell you, my son, who's in second grade at Tampa Palms Elementary, has done 3 different sets of standardized testing through iReady, through the new Achieve 3000, and through another program. You know, and I understand that we have to collect data to differentiate between our students, but we don't need 3 different computer softwares to give us that data. You know, trust teachers. They know how to evaluate their students. They know how to figure out where their gains need to be met. They don't need a software to be able to tell them that. And there are so many students who aren't test ready, you know, who don't operate on an Achieve 3000 or an iReady at the same capacity they do with the real teacher in front of them who they feel safe with and who they have a connection with. So it might not even be accurate data testing. So these are the conversations we need to have. And this is the value in having educators on the school board, is they really understand the impact of these tools that we're approving or talking about using.
Yeah. So got a question, and there was a statement said, Jessica, keep talking. So the people love it. So the question from Don says, right now schools have to stay open due to the state's executive order, but if the FEA wins the court case, which gives the board the power to make this decision, whose metrics will you trust?
Oh, goodness. Well, the FBA, I'm always on the side of the teachers union and on the union in general. And I would dare to say the reason that they would even be taking this court case forward is because they care about the safety and health and well-being of their teachers, their support staff, and the students. And for me, I say that safety and public health and school health is at the forefront of my platform, and I really mean that. And I understand that it's very complex, right? Nobody saw a pandemic coming, and it's very challenging because the way that we waited for so long to make a decision and build any infrastructure, we really pitted working parents and parents who rely on our schools for important services against teachers who wanted to protect their own health. And I think that was a huge disservice. And if we had been proactive about it and realistic about it in May and really worked to figure out workarounds, whether it was e-learning centers or sending, the support staff to students' homes to provide those services, or different ways where we could both prioritize the health of everyone involved, but also be realistic about these, inefficiencies that we have by closing schools. But I would always side with people who are trying to promote the safety of our students and school staff, because if our teachers are sick, if our school staff is sick and they're not able to take care of our students, we don't even have an education. We can ship students off, but they can't even provide childcare if they're sick and they're not able to do that. And we're seeing that now is we rushed open schools, and now that there are teachers who are sick, and Nadia touched on it, when they go into quarantine and they quarantine those classrooms, those students aren't offered e-learning because we can't ask those teachers who are already doing e-learning to take on more students. We don't have enough professionals who were ready and available for the quarantines. And this all just comes from lack of being realistic and pushing ideas and solutions based on politics instead of putting people at the forefront of our decisions.
Yeah. You said it. Look, I'm with you 100% with this. And, the district went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and a meeting literally right before school was starting about what we were doing on Monday. And it was inexcusable. And it was just one of those things where leaders make a decision, stick with it. But instead, they wanted to play politics, in my opinion, because they wanted to appease the pressure that they was receiving from the state and the president. Yeah. And at the end of the day, our kids' safety comes first. So I'm glad that you touched on it. So here's a question and statement. This is a good format. I like this StreamYard broadcast system. Thank you. I love it too. Speaking of testing and transparency, what flexibility does a school board have in adjusting mandated tests, whether teachers must teach to the test or be given the freedom to teach as they see best?
So that's a good question, because really it revolves around policy, right? And in our school policies, that's what guides our superintendent in carrying out what guidelines we're gonna use. Now, some of the state mandated curriculum and some of the testing is at the state level, and we don't necessarily have the ability to supersede that. But when it comes down to, actual classroom management and the policies that we have, the school board has a lot of flexibility in creating policies that give teachers the ability not to only teach towards the test, to use other metrics, to have freedom in their curriculum. And that's what we really need to advocate and get back for. As I mentioned, now that we've got this Achieve 3000, it's just another tool that's being pushed, as opposed to teachers having freedom and autonomy in designing their curriculum. Now we have, and that's not from the state level, that's at the county level. And that was something that we approved. And now the superintendent is really utilizing that to push more students towards that curriculum for teaching towards the test. How much time students have to be on iReady is a policy that we're able to control at the county level. The more that we push students towards being on the computer and learning through iReady, is less interaction that they're going to have with teachers who aren't just teaching towards a test. Also, how closely the lesson plans have to necessarily match the standards and how much they can utilize the standards, right? Because we have a whole new group of standards. The standards have changed every few years. And now we have DeSantis's best standards, and giving teachers the freedom in their curriculum to touch on those important parts of the standards, but really to engineer their own lessons to make sure that they are differentiating, that they are using all the modalities. Your classroom as a teacher. You know which one of your students are visual learners, which one of your students are audio learners, which ones need to come towards the front, which ones, how to best create those lessons so that you engage all of your students. And the more we put in policies that take that autonomy away and we push towards these programs that only teach towards this test is how we engineer whether or not we're going to support those policies that come down from the state or not.
Good
oh
question.
Yeah, that's not my dog.
See, I told you was gonna hear my dog.
You're like, yeah, whoop whoop whoop, or she.
I'm not sure which one it was on that one. So let's shift topics a little bit away from standardized testing. And there was a lot of comments here. And I do want to read this one. Along the same lines of testing, students should not be forced to sit for end of the year standardized tests this year. And I want to sit with that and say, absolutely, just from an equity perspective, that there are some schools that are held to the accountability standard that if they do not meet their goal, then that means that an operator will come in and dismantle that school. And we already have School of Hope, Idea Public Schools, that's not a public school, it's a charter school that is coming to East Tampa in 2021. So it's really, really important that we're intentional. So before I shift topics on that, I do want to give you an option to kind of give your thoughts about this year in standardized testing.
I think the idea of pushing standardized testing during a year where the last year we had crisis schooling and the new year we've had very little standardization in both e-learning and brick to mortar is a disservice to our students. I think they're struggling. There's going to be huge achievement gaps based on access to technology, based on, all the things that we saw come to light when it was the pandemic, when we talked about, whether or not students had broadband or whether or not, all of these inequalities that have been brought to light because of the pandemic are going to be even greater until we have the opportunity for things to normalize a little bit, and to push standardized testing on students who have had very little support, who haven't necessarily been in school, who were in crisis schooling, who are still traumatized from that experience, who aren't, emotionally, who are still trying to process all the emotional that comes along with this. And also, the civil unrest we have in our country and all the other greater things that our students are dealing with right now, to try to push a standardized test as a way to capture whether or not, they're up to par, or to give them value is unconscionable to me. It's not a good indicator of where those students are at. It's not a good indicator of where our teachers and where gains have been. Unprecedented time call for unprecedented actions, and doing the same old standardized testing, which is based on profit. I mean, let's be honest about it. The reason why there's a push for standardized testing is because the standardized testing companies make huge amounts of money on that. And this is all this tie into this privatizing education. It's based on profit. It's not based on the benefit of our students and making our schools and our staff and our students better. It's based on making money, because those standardized tests right now are not a good indication of where our students are at. It's just a way to get that money flowing to the people who've invested into those organizations. So I am totally against that. I think we need to stop and look at our students individually. We need to talk about wraparound services. We need to really evaluate where they are. We need to differentiate so we can reach those students. And we need to stop thinking that a test is a good way to measure whether or not they have value.
You nailed it. And there was a comment when you were talking, and I just had to chuckle. There's nothing standard about 2020, and I'm right there with you. Period. Boo.
That is for sure. Absolutely.
So this next comment actually ties in perfect to the shift in the question. So thank you, Amy, for this. So I'm not sure if you covered this, but how are we going to remedy classes way over limit and teacher shortages with the current budget crisis? We need more teachers to balance classes.
Absolutely. So that's a really good question, because it doesn't seem like there's really a limit on classroom sizes, especially when it comes to e-learning, especially if you're somebody who's doing simultaneously teaching. Like, how does that play into a classroom limit if you've got students who are in your class, but you're also doing e-learning at the same time? Do you count those students twice? It's very confusing. But I'm still not sure how the board is kind of double talking, right? So they tell us that we have a huge amount of vacancies and that there's a teacher crisis and that with a teacher shortage, we don't have enough teachers. But at the same time, they say that we're overstaffed and that we've been overstaffed for a long time and that the remedy for the budget is cutting staff. So from somebody who's not privy to all the details, it sends a mixed message and it's very confusing. I guess what my solution would be is to do a very transparent school by school audit where it really tells you each school, the population, how the teachers in that school are staffed, how they're supported, what support they're offering those students to see if we're really overstaffed or not. Personally, I think that we're not looking, and I know Nadia probably touched on this, but we're not looking at the top. We're talking about cutting right at the forefront. We're talking about cutting classroom teachers and support staff. But when we're talking about the budget, if we have a teacher crisis, a shortage, why aren't we cutting more at the top? What's going on with that layer up there? Those salaries are way more than our teachers' salaries. So cutting, even 2 people at the top could save 3 or 4 teachers. So we really need to have those deeper conversations. And that's where transparency comes into it and why we have to be transparent in the budget. We hear, oh, we're not cutting teachers. We are cutting teachers. They're overstaffed. We're understaffed. And until we have hardline numbers in front of us, here's this school, here's how many teachers it has, here's how many students it has, here's how we feel it's overstaffed, and this is why we're making the cuts where we are. Here's, here's our upper level of administration here. Here's how many we have. To me, what it seems like, if you look at the budget and the upcoming budget, it looks like they've allocated a lot more money for teachers, but less money for administration. So I personally think that the goal here is to cut teachers and then force administration into those positions, into classroom positions. And they're going to say, this is your choice. We don't have your administration role anymore. You can either go into the classroom or not. And I find that to be an ineffective way of making sure we have the most qualified teachers in front of our students. So I'm not really sure if that answered your question, but I think, it's a really complicated question because we're just not getting transparent information about where we're overstaffed and how that affects the budget.
Well, Amy said complete double talk. So I think Amy was agreeing with your points. So Jennifer says, it sounds like teachers could be moved around to even class loads before anyone needs to be cut.
I agree with that. Yeah. And that doesn't seem to be the case from what I'm hearing. And again, that's confusing because you hear one thing coming out from our superintendent at the school board meetings and all of these great public service announcements. But then as Bianca, as you know, because you're being transparent about it, teachers are telling a completely different story. They're saying they're already being cut, that they've had their notices, that they know specifically who they're cutting. But then you hear different information from the superintendent who says there haven't been any cuts and that information is preliminary. But absolutely, we should definitely be shifting teachers around, and we do that every year anyway, right? We look at the units we have, where there aren't enough units, where there are more units there's a lottery, teachers go into it, there's a pool, they move around. So we should be doing more of a shifting than a straight cutting and then trying to fill those positions from the top. I find that to be ineffective if we're really looking at impacting students with the best teachers in front of them personally.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's a lot of mixed messages. You are completely right. And that's why I go back to the 3 principles: accountability, transparency, and integrity. So along those lines, my next question is, what are some of the things that you are excited about when you become elected in District 3?
Oh my goodness. I'm excited about so much. First of all, I'm really excited about trying to rebuild a relationship with the community, and specifically with our teachers as well. I feel like so much of our problems is this disjointed relationship we have where the community is always suspicious about the board because there's not a lot of transparency. There's a lot of misinformation going on. So really being able to get in there and rebuild that confidence with our community, really work with teachers to make sure that their voice is included in the process, really making sure that the community feels encouraged to come and share their thoughts, whether it's for 2 minutes of public comment or, 2 hours of public comment, making sure that they feel that we're there and that we're listening to them, and then using my ability to educate them, using that time when we're, addressing the public to really say, I know these are hard decisions, but here's the reason that we're making them. It's because overall, this is how it's going to benefit our community. And thank you for, being a part of that. And thank you for your engagement, and continue to be a voice to push us to be better. So I think re-healing that relationship is really, really exciting to me, because I think that for anything to move forward and to be productive, you have to have a real relationship between the community and the elected officials and the board members. Also, really being able to dive into policy and see how we can be more effective with our policy and advocate that. Like I said, I've been meeting with so many different groups, whether, it's a group of people who represent our Native American population, who feel like some of our mascots are damaging to our students, and being able to advocate for changing some of our mascots, whether it's working with our LGBTA community to be more inclusive and making sure that we're putting out policies that make our students feel protected and safe, whether or not, it's reevaluating our constant school shooter drills and the trauma that inflicts on our students. We had so many parents who came and they talked, at the meetings about the trauma this whole thing is doing to our students and what that looks like. But on the same token, constant school shooter drills is very traumatic. So really diving into these policies and seeing how, even if there's a few tweaks, we can make them more inclusive, make students feel more protective, make our community feel more engaged, and really rebuild that relationship. That's what I'm the most excited about.
Well, I'm very excited for you, and especially the way that you have ran your campaign. And so the next question is about your campaign, and how has that been with this new pandemic world and being able to campaign? And can you share with the voters what that's like?
Oh, it's a real challenge. I don't love being a politician. I'm just going to be, a candidate. I'll just be honest about it. Because really, I want to spend all my time talking to voters. And there are so many minute details of running a campaign that people don't think about. What a sacrifice it is, the time that you sacrifice with your friends and your family and your loved ones just to make a million little decisions. What do I want my mailers to look like? What do I want them to say? What do I want my script to look like? All of these decisions to really make sure that your voice is heard in the campaign process. All of those little details takes away so much from being able to reach voters, hear their voices, figure out, how you can be reflective of those. So thank goodness we have a lot of virtual forums. That's been kind of a godsend that, and especially the way that you're doing this, where people can come on directly and ask questions. I've been lucky enough where I've worked on enough grassroots campaigns where I do have the ability to, even if I'm not the number one fundraiser, to kind of put my grassroots network together and still get out the vote. But for so many candidates who don't have the money to pay somebody else to do it for them, or like Nadia was saying, don't have the experience, they're really at a disadvantage. And it's really hard for candidates to come in who are really passionate and qualified, but don't have the time and experience or the money and the ability to fundraise and be competitive. But what I think I've really missed the most is usually I would imagine out on the campaign field, you get to know all the other candidates and you kind of build this, relationship, and you have each other's backs. And right now we don't really get to do that. So it's been a little isolating and lonely. I've had some of the other candidates, we've had phone conversations, but it's not the same thing as when you're waiting backstage in a forum and you're bouncing ideas off each other and you become like this family. It's been really isolating to do all this alone. So that's been challenging. But you know what? Life is challenging, and it's always going to throw challenges at us. And, the people who are really in this for the right reasons, they rise to the top. They figure out how to reach their voters. They show up even when they think it's going to be an uncomfortable situation, and they speak truth to power about what they're passionate about. They're completely transparent, and they move forward. So while it's been definitely a challenge, it's also been a great opportunity for growth.
Well, I just want to just thank you for being here. And I asked Nadia this question, and I want to ask you this as well. Do you have any other political aspirations other than school board?
So, no, because really my passion is about education. However, if I get into the school board and I realize that state legislation is really, handicapping my ability to make change in education, I can't say that if I was really successful as what I did and I felt like I did a great job and that the public really responded well to my style of governing and that I was impactful, and I thought that eventually I could have a bigger impact by going on and being an advocate at the state level. I can't say that I would absolutely rule that out, because my whole goal is to make impact, to affect policy and make our community, our state, and possibly our country better. But after running a school board race, I don't know if I would want to take on that kind of a race. So right now I would say no, but who knows? At the end of the day, I'm in here to make an impact. And if that can be in another position, then I can't say that I would be closed off to that, to just be completely honest.
And I love it. And that's exactly why these questions are here. And it's just, to give people, a understanding that everyone is human and we all have our goals, but we need to be very transparent about those goals. And sometimes what we've seen is that there are school board candidates that have bought their way into a seat because people are not paying attention.
Yeah.
And they buy their way to their seat and they use their position to leverage into other political arenas, but they weren't intentional and passionate about the first area that they jumped in. So I just wanted to just kind of, ask that question and kind of, clear the air so that you could be transparent about that and what that looks like. So before we close, I do want to give you an opportunity to just say whatever is on your heart to the voters. And if you have any questions to the voters or any questions to your opponent, and wait, before you do that, because we're running short on time, we do have somebody to ask you a question. Yes. So let's go ahead and have them come on.
Uh-oh.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Uh-oh, we can't hear you.
No.
Okay. Oh man. Okay. So with that being said, I was trying to squeeze that one in. So just kind of give your voters an overview of, your thoughts, any questions you have to your opponent. Just your heart is here on this platform with people watching.
So I appreciate that. Thank you. I would urge the voters, just as you do every single time that you have a conversation, to be very intentional, with who we're placing on our school board. I'm not trying to run a negative campaign because I think that detracts from the issues. And it's a lot of times it's a smoke screen because people don't have a lot of substance in what they're running on. But I will say that my opponent seems to have a very big disconnect from what he says he stands for, and some of the issues that he says when he puts in all caps that he's there for all students, and where he's getting his financial backings from. It came up on Tampa Tiger Bay today that, my opponent has said that he is absolutely committed to ending the school to prison pipeline. But one of the $1,000 contributions that he took, he said it was a $250 contribution. Makes me wonder if he even knows what's going on in his financial records, and if he's able to balance his own campaign finance report. But one of the $1,000 donations that he took was from Jamie Grant's PAC. Jamie Grant, as we know, is a state legislator who was at the forefront of stopping Amendment 4 from, being passed. Our voters passed to give restoration rights, and Jamie Grant blocked that as much as he possibly could. And then at the same token, he has a PAC where he gets a lot of money, not only from GEO, which is one of the largest private prison corporations, and also runs detention centers that has been accused of extreme human rights violations. There's a lot of AMSCOTs on there and predatory lending issues. So in general, he's also taken huge contributions, bundled contributions, which means that there are developers who have a lot of shell companies that give money under these shell companies so they can get around the campaign finance laws. As opposed to only being able to give $1,000, they're able to give $20,000. You have to be very intentional. It's really easy when you're running for office to say, I support ending the school to prison pipeline, or I want to support all students. But when you're accepting contributions that completely tell a different story, and that's who's backing you, that's problematic. There's also a problem that he was accepting these contributions when he was on a public board or county commission board. He was on the planning board, where he was appointed to be a completely non-biased voice, so that when he made decisions about planning, he didn't have anyone who he was owed anything to. And then he started running for school board and accepting these donations from developers, and he was still on that board. And what he should have done is resigned right away, so there was no conflict of interest, but he had to be pressured to do so. So I'm not saying anything about his character, but I would just urge people in general to see who's financially supporting your candidate, to make sure that their intentions are valid and that they're really who they say they are. It's really easy to throw around words, but if you don't have examples behind that, if you haven't done the research, if you haven't done the work, I haven't even seen him talk about a school board meeting or what's happening in our school board. So I just want people to really not get caught up in, a lot of rhetoric or, flashy words, but really do your research about the quality and the values of the people who you're electing. And thank you for that opportunity.
Absolutely. And so I just thank you for being here. It speaks a lot that you were able to show up and be on this platform again to, give your voice and, make sure that you're intentional, folks. The people that are watching, I'm telling you, this is a vital time. The people that are on school board seats, it's very, very important. This is why Teaching for the Culture is here. This is why we've created this platform to change the narrative and not just allow people to buy their way into a school board seat, but actually holding people accountable to what their platform is. So therefore, we're not dealing with budget crisis. Therefore, we're not dealing with Hillsborough County leading the school to prison pipeline. So all of these issues that we have, we can actually get to some solutions. And so I just really appreciate everyone's time and being here. And thank y'all for being with Teaching for the Culture. And Jessica, thank you again for coming out. I appreciate it. And you guys have a great weekend. Have a great night. And I'll see y'all next week. We have District 5 and District 7. Now, what I will say about District 5, we have some issues with District 5. So we're actually going to have some children for District 5. But then we have Lynn Gray that will be on for District 7. Sally Harris has declined to participate in the debate. And it's really unfortunate that people that are run for school board do not want to have intentional conversations about what's really happening in our world. And so, again, thank you again for tuning in, and you guys have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And I can't wait for you to hold me accountable.
You know it.
I do. Thank you.
All right. Good night.